Hello there, men, and welcome to the Masculinism Movement channel, a place for men to be men and talk about masculinity and men's issues. I'm your host, Brian Crawl, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the male mental health crisis and the problems with psychotherapy causing it. Part 2, since there's so much to it that I couldn't fit it all into one video, though luckily I did get more than half of it done last time. But as you can probably tell from that video, I have really only had bad experiences with therapists. In recent years, whenever I get referred to them, since I've had so many bad experiences, including the one who lied on a medical form to put me under mental health arrest simply for crying, I decided to record any sessions that I have with them. However, I haven't been able to find a single therapist who will agree to allowing me to record our sessions, which has revealed an even darker truth that these bad experiences I've had of therapists behaving badly were not isolated incidences. They were not just simply a fluke. The only reason I can't find a therapist who will allow sessions to be recorded is because they all reserve the right to say and do things in session that they can later deny. They do not want their words to go on record. They want to be able to commit malpractice and then lie about it. Why else would they object to the session being recorded? If they were only saying things that were helpful to their client and acting professional, they should want their client to record the session so that they could listen to it again. And they wouldn't worry about that client sharing that recording with anyone else either. In fact, they should want it because it would only show what a good therapist they are and help promote their practice. But realizing that this isn't the case, that the opposite is what is true, and that therapists don't want to be recorded because they are all potentially unethical and harmful, has been very concerning for me and is one of the main reasons I decided to do these videos exposing the problems with this field. Now that you've heard about that worst case scenario of being put under mental health arrest, I'll tell you what the best case scenario was, and that is that none of them helped me at all. And guess what? I'm not the only one. There are plenty of case studies out there that show that therapists are not helping people, but actually making them get worse. All you have to do is type into Google case studies of therapy harming patients, or dangers of therapy, or anything like that, and you will find numbers of these case studies. In fact, here are some statistics I'd like to share with you on the effectiveness of psychotherapy, taken from the book The Great Psychotherapy Debate: Models, Methods, and Findings by Bruce E. Wampold. Just for starters, the best results that research can suggest is about 60% of clients benefit, and that is at best. The fact that about 40% do not, and again, that is when it's at its best, is a huge margin of error. Something hard science shouldn't have. 60% is not a good success rate, and most people would not do most things if they had such a poor success rate, especially things that are so expensive and time consuming. Imagine working a job where you only got paid 60% of the time when you were doing your best. And when you were doing less than your best, you would get paid less often. You wouldn't take that job, would you? And when we talk about the best conditions, some of them are so good that they are impossible to replicate for most of the population. I've heard of studies of therapies that work because they are extremely costly, and the patients not only get a higher degree of support from their therapist than most do when they're signing up for normal therapy, but they are getting a higher degree of support from family members and the surrounding community than most people ever do. And so, of course, these studies that place people into supernaturally ideal conditions do produce a good result. But the problem is these conditions never ever get replicated ever again. Not for a replication study, since that would be too expensive to redo, and not in the real world when patients are signing up for therapy. And in the scientific method, if a study cannot be replicated, then it doesn't actually prove anything, right? That study that was successful might have just been a fluke. So the best results in therapy are not reasonable enough to be expected for just anyone and everyone, unless you are signing up to take place in one of these super expensive clinical tests. But that's just the beginning. Now let's talk about the worst case scenarios. Michael Lambert found that about 8% of adults actually mentally deteriorate during psychotherapy. And I find it interesting that the word deteriorate was used here, as that's pretty alarming when you think about it. Like, what does that mean? What is mental deterioration, right? It's got to be pretty bad, and 8% is a lot. That's close to 10%. That is a significant amount of people getting not only worse, but so bad that they're calling it a deterioration. It's almost like therapy has caused mental health issues or a mental health crisis, right? It's not helping, it's hurting them. It may be taking someone who's closer to healthy and then making them as bad as they could possibly ever get, putting them into a worst case scenario. And that's just for adults, but when treating children, this happens 2 to 3 times as much. 15 to 24% of adolescents leave therapy in a worse state than when they started, Lambert found. This is a large number of children getting worse because of something that is supposed to make them get better. And they're children, so those effects on them can be serious and life-altering, and something that really negatively impacts their development into adults and can then affect them for the rest of their life. So I find that very concerning, and hope that any of you parents out there hearing this will be reluctant to take your child to a therapist. Make sure they really need one before you bring them to one, like my mother did automatically when her and my father were getting divorced. She just thought that taking her children to a therapist is what a good mother should do during a divorce, when the therapists that she took me to probably were making me worse and not better. Now, here's something interesting. Bruce Wampold found that all therapies that work do so with about similar effectiveness, and the biggest variable that made the difference is not the school of psychology or the form of therapy, but the therapists themselves and how good they are and how dedicated and passionate they were about their work. However, Michael Lambert found that 90% of therapists rated their own effectiveness as being better than their peers, and that psychodynamic therapists are especially overconfident in their abilities. And this overconfidence is something that often leads to failure due to lack of appropriate objective evaluation of treatment and the ability to see faults and potential for failure. And speaking of which, Lambert also found in one study he conducted that not a single qualified therapist was able to detect when a patient was getting worse. And if therapists cannot even detect it, they certainly cannot prevent it, right? They certainly can't do anything to help keep that from happening, which is why it happens not infrequently, because there are a number of harmful therapies out there. In fact, Dr. Scott Lilienfeld identified potentially harmful therapies in a 2007 study called Psychological Treatments That Cause Harm, published in Perspectives of Psychological Science. In this study, 12 leading outcome researchers found unanimously that about 10% of clients deteriorate during therapy. There's that dark word again, meaning that they have a worsening of symptoms, the appearance of new symptoms that weren't previously there, excessive dependence upon the therapist, whom I called a crutch in the last video, and they may even cause harm to their family members and become reluctant to seek out other treatment, which may be more effective due to this bad experience. And this study also identified a number of different therapies that have emerged over the years and been used temporarily by therapists who genuinely believed in them. But after some time, they were forced to stop because they were exposing the clients to intense emotion and causing them much more harm than good, by causing people to become much more traumatized and often to turn to drugs and alcohol or become more mentally unhealthy in some way and even commit suicide in some cases. And I have a list for you of what these therapies were exactly so that you can make sure never to engage in any of them. Critical incident stress debriefing, scared straight programs for young offenders, facilitated communication, grief counseling for normal bereavement reactions, boot camp interventions for conduct disorder, drug abuse prevention programs for adolescents such as DARE. I went through that when I was a kid, and it only made me curious about the drugs I wanted to try. Therapies focused on identifying early trauma, where this could actually implant bad ideas in someone's mind, like a victim mentality. Coercive restraint therapies, and recovered memory technique, which can actually plant false memories into someone's mind. This is just a short list for you of the worst therapies out there that have done the most harm to people, but these are not the only therapies that have been harmful in the field. There is actually a book called Crazy Therapies, which describes many more instances of bad therapy. And the book was reviewed by Philip Zimbardo, who wrote in Behavioral Interventions that the book revealed situations in which therapists can become, quote, persuasive agents of destructive influence. One of the therapies detailed there is called attack therapy, which employs verbal abuse and public humiliation, and has been found harmful to half of the patients it was used on. Another study done by Castonguay et al. In 2010, called Training Implications of Harmful Effects of Psychological Treatments, published in American Psychologist, suggests that all psychotherapists have, quote, likely harmed one or more of our clients, due to how they, quote, at one point or another in their careers, failed to meet the most basic and ethically important principle guiding the profession, which is, first, do no harm. And just look at this special issue article put out by the APA in 2021 on harmful therapy, which was a really big deal. Linked right there in the description below. If you see the link that says PsychNet and you click on it, you'll get taken to an article called Harmful Treatments in Psychotherapy by Dean McKay and Amanda Jensen Doss. That will give you much more good information on this topic that I think you will find very interesting. So you see, there are obviously a lot of issues in the field of psychotherapy that have shown it to be a pseudoscience at best and medical malpractice at worst. And that is not even getting into the whole scam of drug addiction and rehab therapy and all of those programs and a lot of the other group therapies out there that are really just scams, and all the other problems that people who are in the field are exposing in the resources that I provided for you. So if you want to learn more about these issues, you can check those out. But as you can see here, I think we've made the case that there is a men's mental health crisis happening right now, a widespread epidemic of mental illness in men that is caused and perpetuated by bad psychotherapy in our society, and all of these problems with the field of psychotherapy that is doing more harm than good to us men. And so if you are a man experiencing mental health problems, I do not recommend that you seek out therapy. And if you are feeling bad enough that you do need some psychological help from a medical professional, I would approach that reluctantly and make sure you are getting referred to people who are actual medical professionals and are not just counselors and social workers. Make sure they have an actual medical degree and that they can actually diagnose and treat you for medical conditions. All right, and that they're not just doing some generic talk therapy, and especially make sure they're not doing some new and potentially dangerous therapy that doesn't really have anything to back it up scientifically. And when you are looking into potential therapists, make sure you interview them all and make sure that you record your sessions, because they can and often will place you under mental health arrest, and you may want that recording to prove you didn't say anything, that they may be claiming you said that you didn't actually say. All right, that's really all of the advice that I can give you on dealing with the field of therapy, because as I said, I have never had any good experiences with therapists. In the best case scenarios, they have just been a big waste of time and energy. And I've known more about my problems than they do. And with the internet and the widespread availability of books these days, you can probably do a lot better with just doing your own research and studies on the issues that you might have. And often the therapists that you find won't be doing any kind of testing or diagnosis, but if you search online, you will probably be able to find sites where you can take tests to see what conditions you might have. So as always, I recommend doing your own research and studies. And that concludes this video. Thanks for listening. Hope I mansplained that good enough for you. If you like what you heard, please click the like button. And if you feel you gained some value from this video and would like to give some back, please do so with the PayPal link below, because your support helps fund me doing this work and fight the good fight for men like you. If you are ready to take the red pill and wake up from the matrix and the matriarchy controlling it and learn everything you need to know about female on male sexism, get your copy of my newly released book called Misandry Exposed, on sale now for a special price that won't last long, so check it out by clicking the link below. And otherwise, you can stay tuned for the next video coming out tomorrow on the mental health crisis, problems with therapy part 2. And until then, take care of yourselves, men, because no woman out there and no therapist are going to. And otherwise, you can stay tuned for the next video coming out tomorrow on the broken man. And until then, take care of yourselves, men, because no woman and no therapist is going to.